This story is titled, Found Out My Daughter Isn't Mine and Filed for Divorce, but my mom and sister took my cheating wife's side. Alright, so I'll just get right to it. My life feels like it's flipped upside down in the worst way, and I don't even know where to start. I'm 33, been married to my wife, she's 30, for 7 years. We have, or I thought we had, a 3-year-old daughter. And I say thought because, yeah, turns out there's a lot I didn't know. It all kicked off like any regular day. I took our little girl out for some fun, just me and her. It was one of those days where everything feels easy, like life's just working out the way it's supposed to. We get back, and I'm just chilling on the couch, already thinking about what we're doing tomorrow. Then my wife comes in. She sits down next to me, kinda close but acting weird. I figured maybe she had something on her mind or just needed to talk. So I go, "What's up?" The look on her face is hard to describe. She's not sad exactly, but there's something heavy there, and her eyes are watering. Then she just blurts out, "There's something I need to tell you, and it's big." That's when my stomach tightens. I'm thinking, is someone sick? Did something happen to her parents? What's going on? She goes quiet for a second, and I'm waiting, half expecting something horrible. But what she finally says hits me like a punch I wasn't braced for. She tells me that our daughter, our little girl who I've loved and raised since the moment she was born, isn't mine. Just straight up drops it like that. I don't think I even understood what she was saying at first, because my mind was already trying to figure out how to respond, but nothing was connecting. It felt like my brain was frozen. But she keeps going, and it gets worse. She tells me she'd had this fling with some guy from the gym right before finding out she was pregnant, and apparently he bailed as soon as he knew there was a kid involved. She's saying it with tears streaming down her face now, and she's apologizing like crazy, saying she never meant to hurt me, that she made a mistake, and she didn't know what else to do. I just sit there staring at her, but I don't really see her anymore. I'm staring at this person, this woman I thought I knew better than anyone, and it feels like she's a stranger. I can barely feel my hands, barely feel anything but this tightness in my chest. It's like my world just got yanked out from under me. The memories start flashing through my head. First time I held our little girl, those sleepless nights when I'd get up to calm her down, teaching her to say daddy, and feeling like I'd been given the world when she did. Every single one of those moments feels twisted now, like they've been yanked away and replaced with a hollow reminder that none of it was real. I was just the guy standing in for some dude who bailed when things got serious. My wife, she's sitting there trying to reach out to me, like putting her hand on my arm and crying harder, trying to say sorry over and over, but it's just noise. I don't even feel like I'm in the same room as her anymore. All I feel is betrayal. I mean, it's not just the affair itself. It's the fact that she hid this from me for 3 whole years. Every single day, I was living a lie, loving a kid who wasn't mine, trusting a wife who never told me the truth. Eventually, I managed to stand up. My legs are shaky, but I tell her I need some air, that I just can't be in the same space as her right now. She starts begging me not to go, saying she doesn't want me to leave, that we can work through it. But I can't hear any of it. I'm barely even holding myself together. I just grab my jacket and walk out the door, leaving her there with all her pleading and crying. The only thing in my head is that I need to get away from her, from everything. I'm standing outside and it's like I'm seeing everything through a fog. My life, my home, my family, they all feel like they're crumbling. And I'm just watching it happen without knowing what to do. I don't even have a plan. Just this overwhelming urge to run, to get away. I finally get myself to the car and drive off, but I don't really know where I'm going. All I know is that I can't go back in there. Not now, maybe not ever. There's this weird emptiness mixed with this dull, throbbing pain in my chest, and it just doesn't stop. I always thought if I was doing everything right, if I was a good husband, a good father, things like this wouldn't happen. But here I am, and it's happening, and there's nothing I can do to change it. Alright, so after that bombshell, I crashed at a hotel for the night. Honestly, I didn't sleep much. My mind was racing with everything my wife had dumped on me, and I couldn't shake this feeling that my life was a joke. I'd spent 3 years raising a kid, thinking she was mine, and now, suddenly, she's not? I could hardly believe it, but there I was, sitting alone in a bland hotel room, thinking of all the moments that felt ripped away. The next morning, I finally turned my phone back on. It was like opening a floodgate. Tons of texts and missed calls from my wife, all her messages popping up one after another. Please come home. We can work through this. I'm so sorry. You're her father no matter what. Blah, blah, blah. I didn't read them all. Didn't want to. Just scrolling through them made my chest tighten, so I stopped halfway and blocked her. I needed space, and seeing her words just added fuel to this mess I was in. After grabbing a quick breakfast, I made a call to a lawyer. I told him the basics, leaving out the emotion, and asked about starting a divorce. The guy was sympathetic, which I appreciated, and walked me through the initial steps. I knew it'd be complicated, especially with the kid involved, but I couldn't see myself staying in that marriage. Not after what she did. I also called my boss, told him I needed time off. I couldn't function at work with this going on, and he gave me a month off, no questions asked. That was probably the only bit of good news I'd had in the last 24 hours. By the evening, I thought I'd finally have a moment to myself, just to breathe and figure out what my next move would be. But nope. That peace was short-lived because my mom and sister decided to get involved. My sister called first, and I picked up, thinking she'd offer me some support. She'd always been someone I could lean on, and after everything that happened, I really needed that. But instead, she starts with, "I talked to wife's name earlier, and she told me what happened. You need to think about your daughter in all this." Right there, my blood started boiling. My daughter? I didn't even know if she was my daughter. And my sister was already choosing sides? She kept going on about how my wife was sorry and how we should work things out for the family's sake. I couldn't even respond at first, just sat there fuming, trying not to explode. When I finally spoke, I said something like, "Do you even get what she did? She lied to me for years. How am I supposed to just forget that?" But my sister wouldn't let up. She went on about how she knew I was hurt, but that I needed to look at the bigger picture. According to her, I had a responsibility to this kid, regardless of how she got here. I told her I didn't need a lecture and hung up. But right after that, my mom called, and it was basically the same conversation on repeat. My mom was even more intense about it. She said things like, "We've all come to love her, and she's a part of this family." She also didn't care about the whole betrayal thing. Apparently, she thought I was being dramatic for wanting a divorce. I tried explaining how messed up it was to find out my wife had been lying to me since the beginning, but she wouldn't listen. My mom said, "You're her father in every way that matters. Biology doesn't change that." She even threw in that I was being selfish and not thinking of my daughter. My daughter, as if nothing had changed. Like the fact that she's not mine was just some minor detail I should brush off. My mom started laying down the guilt heavy, saying that if I went through with the divorce, she'd disown me. That stung, and honestly, it pissed me off even more. I sat there in silence, just taking it all in, feeling like I was the only sane one in the middle of this messed up situation. My own mom was choosing my wife's side, throwing years of loyalty out the window as if my pain was an afterthought. It was like no one cared that I'd been lied to for years, that my entire reality had been a sham. They were all too focused on this idea of family, and a kid who, turns out, isn't even biologically mine. The whole thing was tearing me up inside, so I ended the call with my mom and decided I needed to get out of there. I called up my best friend and asked if I could crash at his place for a while. He didn't even hesitate, just told me to come over. That was the first real bit of support I'd felt since this whole thing blew up, and honestly, it was a relief. I packed a few things, got in the car, and drove over to his place. Once I got to my friend's house, I could finally let my guard down. I didn't have to pretend everything was fine. Didn't have to keep hearing people telling me to work it out or think of my daughter. My friend and his wife just listened. They didn't push me to forgive or act like this was no big deal. For the first time in days, I felt like someone actually understood what I was going through. A couple of days later, things got even messier. My mom sent me this long text, basically saying that if I went through with the divorce, she'd never forgive me. She went on about how I'd be abandoning my daughter and how it would break the family. My sister chimed in with similar stuff, saying I was acting heartless and not thinking about the impact on the kid. It was like they'd all forgotten who was betrayed here. I couldn't believe how quickly they'd all rallied around my wife, treating me like the villain for even considering a divorce. I'd been the one lied to, the one who had to live with the shock of finding out my life was a lie, and yet they were making me feel like the bad guy. I couldn't take it anymore. I shot back a reply to my mom's text, saying I had every right to leave and that it was unfair for her to guilt-trip me. I told her I wasn't abandoning anyone. My wife had already abandoned our marriage the day she decided to cheat on me and then lie about it for years. I don't think she took that well because her next reply was short and cold, just saying, "Do what you want, but don't come crying to us when you realize what a mistake you're making." It hurt, but I also felt a weird kind of relief. If this was the price of standing up for myself, then fine. After shutting down my mom and sister, I figured things would die down, and maybe I'd get the space I needed to figure things out. But instead, It felt like they were doubling down. I was barely holding myself together as it was, but it was like they decided I was the one who needed to be fixed, and they weren't about to let up. A couple of days later, my wife must have gotten the divorce papers, and that kicked off a whole new round of chaos. The messages and calls started again, not just from her, but from my mom and sister too. My phone was blowing up with texts about how I shouldn't make any rash decisions, and how family should come first. It was nonstop. Then, my mom sent this massive text, laying out everything she thought I was doing wrong. She said that I should man up and be a good husband and father, even if the kid wasn't biologically mine. She kept saying that this was my chance to show real strength, and that family is more than DNA. Her exact words were something like, "Anyone can walk away, but a real man stays and fixes what's broken." I was honestly stunned. My mom, who I'd always thought was in my corner, was basically calling me a coward for wanting out. She went on about how I was all my daughter had, and that it was my responsibility to think of her first. She told me, "You've already raised her for 3 years. She knows you as her dad. Don't throw that away." And yeah, I get it. She's not wrong that my daughter knows me as her dad. But that doesn't change the fact that my wife lied to me every single day for those 3 years. It's not just something I can ignore. When I didn't reply right away, my sister decided to jump in too. She left me a voicemail, and the tone in her voice was almost pleading. She went on about how I'd regret this someday, and how I'd be hurting an innocent child by walking away. She even said something like, "I know you're hurting, but don't make a mistake you can't take back." The way she was talking, it was like she thought I was being impulsive, like I hadn't been dealing with this nightmare 24/7 since I found out. It made me feel like no one in my own family even cared what I was going through. At this point, I was running on fumes, just trying to get through each day without losing it. My friend's place was a refuge, but there was only so much he and his wife could do to keep me from spiraling. I spent my days avoiding my phone and trying not to think about the mess my life had become. My wife hadn't just betrayed me. She'd taken away my entire sense of stability, and now my own family was backing her up, telling me to forgive and forget, like it was some minor screw-up. One evening, when things had gotten quiet for a bit, I let my guard down and checked my messages. My wife had left a long one, pouring her heart out, or at least pretending to. She said she was sorry for everything, that she'd do anything to make it up to me, and that she never wanted to lose me. She even had the nerve to say she'd been too scared to tell me sooner, because she didn't want to hurt me. The irony, right? Because now the hurt was all-consuming, and it wasn't just something I could brush off. She kept saying she wanted us to stay a family, that I was the only father our daughter had known, and that we could be happy again. The way she was talking, you'd think we'd had some minor argument, not that she'd been lying to me for years. She actually wrote, "We can get through this if we stick together." Like, really? After everything? She thought I could just put it behind me and carry on as if nothing had happened. After reading that, I felt my stomach turn. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Nothing I'd say would even scratch the surface of what I was feeling. It was like she expected me to be some perfect, forgiving guy who could take all this in stride. But I wasn't. I'm just a regular person who got blindsided. And I was angry, beyond angry. The next day, my mom called again, and this time I picked up. I told myself I'd stay calm, but as soon as she started in with her usual line about thinking of the bigger picture, I lost it. I told her how betrayed I felt, how every day since I found out had felt like I was living in someone else's life, and that I needed her to understand my side for once. I told her, "Mom, I'm the one who got cheated on. I'm the one who's been lied to every single day for years. Can you even try to see it from my side?" But she wouldn't let up. She kept saying things like, "Life isn't black and white, and everyone makes mistakes." It was like she had an answer for everything I said, a counterpoint for every bit of pain I tried to explain. And then she dropped this gem. "You're going to throw away your marriage and a beautiful family over one mistake?" That's when I snapped. I told her it wasn't one mistake. It was a string of lies, one on top of another, and I was tired of everyone pretending it wasn't a big deal. I told her that I was starting to feel like my own family cared more about keeping the peace than about what I was going through. I could hear her sigh on the other end, like I was some stubborn kid refusing to listen to reason. Finally, she said, "Fine, do what you want, but don't expect us to support you if you keep shutting everyone out." It felt like a slap in the face, like my own mother was drawing a line in the sand. I ended the call without saying goodbye. Hanging up, I felt a weird sense of relief, but also this heavy emptiness. It was clear that to my mom and sister, family meant keeping things together at any cost, even if it meant ignoring my pain and pretending everything was fine. They didn't get it, and maybe they never would. As I sat there alone, the reality of everything settled in. My wife's betrayal, my family siding with her, the pressure they were putting on me to stay, none of it was going away. This was going to be a long, ugly fight, and I was in it by myself. But I'd rather be alone than live in a lie any longer. Update 1. Alright, so after weeks of avoiding her, of dodging my mom's guilt trips and ignoring my sister's voicemails, I finally decided I needed to face my wife in person. It was eating me up, not knowing why she did it, not understanding how she could lie to my face for years. I had questions, and maybe I wasn't going to get the answers I wanted, but I couldn't move forward until I tried. I texted her to meet me at a cafe nearby. I wasn't ready to go back home, not with all those memories, and I didn't want her at my friend's place. This cafe felt neutral enough. I got there early and grabbed a corner table where we'd have some privacy, but wouldn't be completely isolated either. My friend and his wife came with me, staying a few tables away in case things got heated or if I needed an out. She walked in, looking tired, like she hadn't slept in days. But honestly, I didn't care. She scanned the room and spotted me, and for a split second, there was this flash of hope in her eyes, like she thought this was some reconciliation, or that I was going to say I'd come around. That annoyed me right off the bat. Did she really think I'd come crawling back just because she cried a few times? Because she felt guilty now? Unbelievable. She sat down across from me and gave this sad little smile. Before she could even start with any apologies, I cut her off. Why'd you do it? I asked, straight to the point. I wasn't there for a sob story, just the truth, no matter how brutal. She took a deep breath and looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her wedding ring. After what felt like forever, she finally started talking. It was a mistake, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was attractive and I was just, I don't know. I was weak. I almost laughed at how casual she made it sound, like she'd tripped over a crack in the sidewalk or something. So, because he was attractive, you thought it was worth throwing everything away? That's it? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't even trying to justify it with anything deeper, just pure attraction. She looked up, and I could see her trying to read me, maybe hoping for some sympathy. I was scared, all right, she said, a bit defensively now. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It just happened. I shook my head, feeling disgusted. So, you didn't plan to cheat, but you did. And you didn't plan to lie to me every day for 3 years, but you did that too. When were you planning on telling me? Or were you just going to keep this a secret forever? She stammered, clearly unprepared for that question. I don't know. I didn't think about it like that. I thought if I kept quiet, we could just move on and be happy. I had to bite back the urge to yell right there in the middle of the cafe. She thought she could lie to me indefinitely, and it would somehow lead to happiness? It was beyond selfish. I felt like I was talking to someone who couldn't comprehend the damage they'd done, like she was in some alternate reality where her actions didn't matter. So, that's it? I asked, leaning back in my chair. You thought keeping this from me was for the best? That you'd just keep playing happy family while I raised a kid who isn't even mine? Her eyes filled with tears, and she started to reach across the table, but I moved back, stopping her cold. Don't, I said, feeling a mix of anger and sadness that I couldn't even describe. Don't try to make this about your feelings. You've had 3 years to think about this. 3 years? And now I'm supposed to just get over it? She started crying harder, but I didn't feel bad. Not anymore. I'd been the one blindsided, lied to, humiliated. She could cry all she wanted, but I was done feeling sorry for her. I let her sit there for a moment, waiting for her to say something that would actually make sense. Something that would at least feel like a real answer. But she just sat there, wiping her tears and looking down at her hands like a scolded child. After a few minutes, I decided I'd heard enough. I didn't come here to watch her break down. I came here for clarity, and if she couldn't even give me that, then there was no point in dragging this out. Look, I said, my voice flat. I'm done. I'm not interested in fixing this, and I'm not interested in being guilted into raising a kid who's not mine. I was ready to be a father, but you took that choice away from me the day you decided to lie. She looked up at me, panicking now. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. She's your daughter. She thinks you're her dad. She doesn't know anything else. Don't walk away from her because of my mistake. She loves you. That part stung. I won't lie. I loved that kid, and in some ways, I still do. But every time I think of her now, I can't separate her from what my wife did. Every "I love you, Daddy" was built on a lie. And as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't stay. I'd be doing it out of obligation, not real love, and that's not fair to either of us. I'll always care about her, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I can't live like this. You made that impossible. And now, you're going to have to deal with the fallout. Not me. She broke down completely then, sobbing openly in the middle of the cafe. People were starting to stare, but I didn't care. This was her mess, and it was about time she faced it alone. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and without another word, I walked out, leaving her there with her guilt and her tears. The weirdest thing is, as I walked away, I felt lighter. I wasn't fixed, I wasn't healed, but I was done carrying her lies. Update 2. After the meeting, I went back to one of my friend's place, where I'd been staying through most of this. He asked how it went, but I didn't really feel like talking. All I told him was, "It's over." He understood, didn't push me for details, just said, "Good for you, man." That took guts. And we left it at that. In the days that followed, I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Simple things, like getting up, eating, and keeping myself busy. I wasn't interested in grand gestures of moving on or healing. Those things felt fake, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I just wanted to feel normal again, even if it was in small ways. Divorce proceedings were already underway, and I met with the lawyer a couple more times to finalize things. Honestly, those meetings were a blur. It felt surreal, sitting in a lawyer's office and hashing out details about a life I thought I'd keep forever. Every time he mentioned custody or financial obligations, it reminded me of how much I'd lost, of the family I thought I had, but never actually did. My wife, ex-wife, I should say, was still trying to reach out. She sent letters, left voicemails, all the usual stuff. I skimmed one of her letters once, but it was just the same old thing. Apologies, pleas for forgiveness, promises that things could be different. She even tried to throw in how our daughter missed me, like that was supposed to make me forget the hell she'd put me through. I didn't respond to any of it. I blocked her on everything, told my lawyer to handle any communication, and left it at that. My family was another story, though. My mom and sister hadn't taken well to my decision, to put it lightly. They couldn't seem to wrap their heads around the idea that I wasn't willing to just forgive and forget and keep playing happy family. Every time I talked to them, it was the same song and dance. "You're overreacting. Think about your daughter. Your wife made a mistake, but she's sorry." It was exhausting, and it hurt, honestly, to feel like I didn't have their support. Eventually, I had to make a choice about that too. I stopped answering my mom's calls, stopped reading the endless texts, and muted the group chat we had. I didn't need the extra weight. If they couldn't stand with me on this, I didn't see why I should keep them in the loop. For now, silence felt like the best choice. But even with the family pressure off my back, there was still this ache I couldn't shake. Letting go of the idea of being a dad was harder than I thought it'd be. I'd gotten used to coming home to my daughter's laughter, to her hugs and bedtime stories, and even though I knew that life was built on lies, I missed it. Every time I saw a family out together, I felt this hollow feeling, like I'd lost a part of myself. But I kept telling myself it was temporary, just something I'd have to get through. One evening, I was out for a walk, something I'd started doing to clear my head, and found myself by this park I used to take my daughter to. I don't even know how I ended up there, but seeing the place hit me hard. I stood there for a while, just watching parents with their kids, feeling like I'd been on the outside of something I'd thought was mine, but it wasn't. And that reminder was enough to make me turn around and head back. I wasn't ready for that yet. Over time, I started finding pieces of myself again. I went back to work, throwing myself into projects to keep my mind occupied. My coworkers knew something was up, but no one pried too much, which I appreciated. My boss was supportive, checking in every so often without pushing me to open up. He just said, "Take it at your own pace, man." And I took that to heart. A few months later, I decided to move out of the city. Too many memories here. Too many places that reminded me of what could have been. I found a place in a new town, somewhere smaller, quieter. Moving was hard, packing up my stuff, going through things that were tied to my old life. I ended up donating or throwing out a lot of stuff that reminded me of her, stuff I didn't want following me around in this new chapter. The first night in my new place was strange. It was empty, sure, but it also felt like a fresh start. I didn't have all the answers yet, didn't feel like I'd fully healed or anything dramatic like that. But sitting there in a space that was all mine, without memories of betrayal lingering in every corner, felt good. I didn't have to look over my shoulder, didn't have to wonder what lie was waiting for me. It was just me, and that was enough for now. As time passed, I started reconnecting with people in a way I hadn't done in years. I caught up with old friends, joined a hiking group, started focusing on hobbies I'd left behind. Slowly, I began building a life that was just mine, not one tied to broken promises or family drama. It was like each new day was adding something back that I hadn't realized I'd lost. And as for my family, I still kept my distance. But it got easier. They'd reach out every now and then, but I didn't feel the same pull to respond. I'd been through enough and didn't have the energy to keep justifying my choices to them. If they couldn't respect my decision, that was on them, not me. Looking back, it's strange to think about how much my life changed in such a short time. I'd built everything around this idea of family, only to watch it shatter. But here I was, standing on the other side, maybe a bit scarred but still standing. I didn't have all the pieces put back together yet, but for the first time I was moving forward on my own terms. And that was something no one could take away from me.